Okay. Okay. 1 second.
Take two.
So, let's just resume sharing. So basically, that video was just Desmond Cole speaking about how racism affects every part of your life, and also how it like is is the case in Canada. So even though there are some people who are more educated, who have more qualifications, as Black people, it can be harder to achieve because of systemic racism. So I'm just going to go into my story. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so my journey writing while Black. So I wanted to be a journalist from the age of 11. I used to take the train to school in London, and I would read the newspaper every morning on the way to school. And I would like flip to the middle of the newspaper, and I would get to this section called Rush Hour Crush, where people would basically leave like love notes for other commuters that they saw on their way to work or their way to school. And it was so like wonderful and amazing to see like how um, something so small could bring a smile to so many people's faces. And that mixed with being informed every day about what was happening around the world really inspired me to want to use my hobby, which is writing, to inform other people about what was going on in the world. So going to university, I really, really wanted to do journalism. I'd luckily had the opportunity to do journalism in high school. I joined the school paper when I was 11, and I basically demanded that I could have a column. I didn't know it was a column, but I wanted some space to talk about the things that were important to me. So I had the chance to cover like mental health, body image, and also sort of talk about parents and teenage angst as well. And so when I was picking the university, I was thinking Ryerson or Carleton, but I also wanted to study my love of history. So I chose UBC because of the amazing school paper, the Ubyssey, which I am now editor of. So joining UBC, the UBC was a bit difficult. So I went to the first meeting and I was so nervous. Like I'd scheduled my semester calendar for the UBC because I knew the meetings were on Friday. So I made sure that I didn't have any classes around that time. And so I walk into the newspaper and for the meeting, and it's completely packed with people. And I'm in the hallway because I was a couple minutes late, and I'm sort of like looking through other people's bodies to sort of like look into the room and see who's there. And so for the whole meeting, which is about 30 minutes, I'm sort of standing in the hallway. And so when the meeting finishes, I'm sort of psych myself up. I'm like, it's going to be okay. Why don't you just walk in and talk to an editor? And so I found an editor whose work I'd been admiring for quite some time. And I introduced myself and said that I loved her work. And she sort of gave me this look like, why do you know what I write? Like, you're really strange. And she handed me her business card, um, which I was like, okay, what do I do with this? So I'm thumbing this business card and I just go home and I feel so stupid. And I'm like, why did I even go and introduce myself? Like, you know, I planned coming to the school around the newspaper and now I'm kind of blowing my chance. But I kept on going back. I tried to write a piece for the same editor, and it was about this video. And so I wrote the first draft and I asked if she could give me feedback. And so I'm waiting and waiting and I don't get any feedback. And then eventually she says, okay, come into the office and I'll meet you at this time. So I go into the office and I sit down and she's not there. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'll just wait. So I sit on the sofa and I'm waiting. Half an hour passes, 45 minutes passes, an hour passes. And I'm like, okay, like maybe she'll come. Maybe I should just wait like 20 more minutes. And I ended up waiting for an hour and a half and she never came. So that was really disheartening. And eventually the piece goes up and it's got her name and my name in the bio as Danielle, and I like to go as Danny. So she's changed half the article. It's up on the website. It's got my name attached to it, but not the name I want. So I message her and I say, do you mind changing the name to Danny because that's what I go by? And she basically said no, took my name out of the byline, and then added it at the bottom and said like with files from Danny. And that was kind of my first experience writing for university journalism. And at the time, there was only one other Black person who wrote for the paper, and he was the sports editor. And he was one of the big reasons why I kept going back, because I looked and I said, well, he's Black and he's managed to become an editor, so maybe there's a space for me, even though it was really difficult. But eventually, after persisting, I managed to make some friends at the Ubyssey. This is me with them at the end of my first year. It's like a 80s themed party. And right there, this is the other editor who is now writing for the Thai. He's amazing. And yeah, that began like my official start with the Ubyssey. So I've been writing for the paper for about 4 years now. But what I would notice is that I wouldn't be given stories the same way as the other writers would. So my white counterparts would be offered stories, or they'd ask for pictures and they'd be given these pictures. And every time I asked, it just seemed like there was someone else ahead of me. But then they realized that I was the only Black writer. So I started to get a lot of pictures about Blackness. So this is one of the first pieces I did, and it was on Black History Month. And I basically interviewed a bunch of students, got their stories like in a really like short paragraph, and then kind of compiled them together as like a sort of like collage of Blackness at UBC. And then this year I did something called Black on Campus, which was a series of personal essays and poems from faculty and students about Blackness at UBC. And it's really great. And I love writing about Black people because I am a Black person. But when it comes down to it, I felt like I was being overlooked. And so eventually this year I became culture editor at the end of April. And then everything happened in June with George Floyd, and they wanted me to write something. And at first I was really hesitant because I didn't want to write about Black issues again for like the 20th time. But then I felt like I had a duty to say something and to talk about my experiences at the Ubyssey and how there's gatekeeping, even in university journalism, and I know the same as in high school journalism. So I'm just going to read a little bit of the excerpt that I wrote. Okay. When I first walked into the Ubyssey office, I was incredibly nervous. I had to ask 3 different people where the room was before I eventually found it. Even though I was only 3 minutes late to the meeting, the office was already jam-packed with bodies. For the long duration of the meeting, I awkwardly stood in the doorway, peeking through the crevices between other students' bodies just to get a glimpse inside. I was starting to get used to these constant jitters. Yes, I was new to Vancouver and had never lived permanently away from home, but for the first time in my life, I was finding it difficult to make friends. I was never one to feel homesick or call my parents from a sleepover, but in the first weeks of school, I found it really difficult to picture this as my new home. When the meeting finished, I took a deep breath before walking inside and quietly waited in line to speak to an editor whose work I had admired for quite a while. When I approached her, she handed me her business card before quickly cutting me off. I beat myself up about it on the way home, thumbing the cheap card stuck between my fingers and feeling doubly stupid. I got lost along the way. 4 years later, I am finding myself sitting at her desk. It was not an easy road to get here. In the 102 years of the Ubyssey, I am the first Black woman to hold the position of editor. I am the second Black person to sit on the editorial period, and I know that holds a lot of weight. I have spent the majority of my 4 years at this paper writing about Black people. This was never particularly intentional, it just happened. I once mentioned to a friend that I was scared of becoming a one-trick pony, allowing myself to be that one girl complaining about racism again, but I was forced to do it, no one else would. If you weren't aware of something, I'll spell it out for you. Being Black at UBC is hard. Not in America, not in BC or Vancouver, but here on our very own campus. I've had the opportunity to talk to faculty. I've been in on lengthy late night conversations with friends. Sometimes it can feel like we are constantly having to fight a losing battle, not just to have our struggles recognized, but to be taken seriously as people. All my Black friends at UBC essentially say the same things. They don't want to rock the boat when a white person screams the N-word at a party. They try not to overthink the fact that they couldn't find a group for a class project, or the fact that they were stared at when the class discussion turned to the topic of slavery. But I don't want to be the only person bringing these things up. I don't want to be a one-trick pony. It's exhausting, and frankly, it's not fair. This year, every editor of this paper is a minority in one way or another, but I am sure they would all admit that they have their own biases and blind spots, even when they are aiming to be objective. I certainly know I do. I hope that the Ubyssey takes this moment to reflect on its own history, which has often been complicit in its lack of coverage on the Black community of this institution, because there's only so much I can do. So yeah, that was my piece on our editorial about anti-Blackness at the Ubyssey. So I'm gonna try and play another clip. Hopefully the sound will be a bit clearer than the last one, but yeah, let me know. So I'm gonna be playing a clip from Christine Garnier, who was the host of the morning show for CBC in the Yukon. And she talks about Indigenous systemic racism against Indigenous people, and also anti-Black racism at the CBC. Okay, wonderful.
Points that Black Lives Matter, the rally.
Can you hear that? No. Okay, 1 second.
You're good, Danny.
One moment, I'm so sorry. Oh, you can hear it? Okay, awesome. Sorry, I couldn't see. Amazing. Okay, I'll play it again. Let's go back. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Danny. Can you try pressing play
you can
one
hear
more time?
Okay, let me try again. Okay, if I play it
conflicts
now, can you hear
with the journalistic standards and practices of the CBC.
Yes?
Yes.
This is painful.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'll go back. Sorry about that, guys.
One of the points that Black Lives Matter, the rally, the protests have been saying is the representation of Indigenous and Black voices on the radio. But beyond that, also not to restrict Indigenous and Black voices on the radio. And I cannot speak for Black reporters. I cannot speak for Black journalists. I do not represent that community, and I will not speak for them. It is difficult to have a voice as strong as mine, knowing that I've been told it is strong, and I hear it now. To be on Tagish-Chun territory, Wolf Clan territory, and not to be able to speak the truth is difficult. It contradicts and conflicts with the journalistic standards and practices of the CBC. This is painful. It makes the job difficult, and it makes it ineffective. We get told that it takes time to move a ship. It's an analogy I've heard often. And all it costs is time for mainstream media, but it is costing us bodies. It is costing us lives. It is costing us the language that has made me so attractive as a personality right now. It is costing us that. And it is costing us our stories. I don't know how to do this job and not be emotional. I don't know how to do this job and not recognize that what it took for me as an Indigenous...
Oh, nothing is playing? Can you guys hear me though?
No, we could hear all of that.
...woman to finally feel like someone would come and look for me if I go missing or was murdered. was to be recognized as a public personality.
Okay, awesome. Sorry. Let me just back. Yeah. Present. Okay, awesome. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm pretty sure you guys heard that. Let me know if you didn't, but just to summarize, Christine, she quit on air, and she talked about not being able to be her most authentic self in the workplace, and also about how the objectivity that is so often applied to journalism can be hindering. And this is something that I felt as well, with stories where I'm like, okay, but that is wrong, that is racist. But then you hear things like, well, we have to be objective. We have to use the right language. We have to make sure we're not offending the person who did the wrong. And so that is something that I've had to grapple with in the discussion that my editorial had to have, about where we draw the line. And now we're at least drawing the line at racism. If something is racist, it is wrong. And so, yeah, I think that's how it relates to me. I think I'm just gonna ask an open question. So like raise your hand if you have something you'd like to add or answer the question. But what does it mean for you to not be able to bring your authentic self to the projects that you work on? Okay, I'm just gonna stop sharing. Yeah. Does anyone have any responses to not being able to bring your most authentic self towards in your work, in your projects, in the pieces that you do? Yeah, as Laura said, feel free to type some answers in the chat if you don't want to say it out loud. I'll wait a little bit. And so whilst you're like thinking, I mean, for me, it's not being able to bring my best. It's not being able to bring my A game, because I know that if like for example, in debates, if people are having a debate but it affects you differently, it sometimes feels hard to be able to be objective in the same way that other people are. And so, for example, in the classroom, whenever they're talking about slavery, or I was in a class where we had to watch a film, and it was about pretty much the abuse of a Black woman, and the film was 3 hours long. And for me, that I couldn't even watch the whole movie, and I was told, well, write an essay on it. And I was like, well, these things, they affect me differently. I can't watch 3 hours of torture of a Black woman. And I think that's one of the things that in my projects, I'm not being able to bring my whole self. Okay, so I see some answers in the chat. Nathalie, excuse me if I got your name wrong, wrote, whenever I have to stop myself from writing something that matters to me, because I feel like people will think I'm overreacting. That's a big one. That's a big one. For me, when it's something that involves me, I have to worry about my delivery. Like, am I going to come across too aggressive in the situation? Am I going to come off stupid if I stutter or if I get upset? Are people going to discount the things I say? And Leilani wrote, I wouldn't feel like I actually wrote it. Yeah, that's you'll feel like you've left part of yourself somewhere else, and that you've had to come to it with a different mindset. And Juliet said, I feel like it does a disservice to the paper and the readers. Yeah, I think that's some of the stuff that Christine was bringing about as well on the clip about, she said something along the lines of, it's a disservice to the CBC and the things that we stand for. So yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the presentation now. Thank you. Okay, awesome. So here are some common systemic issues in Canadian journalism in general. These were put together by the Canadian Association of Black Journalists and also the Canadian Journalists of Color group as well. So the first thing that is common amongst newsrooms in Canada is that newsrooms do not self-report newsroom demographics. And I know the Ubyssey doesn't do this internally or externally, but this can be problematic because it prevents us from truly understanding who is delivering the news we receive. And so as a result, we cannot access the level of representation among newsroom staff or management. And this limits the amount of diverse coverage there is, because a more diverse news team translates to a more diverse coverage. And so, as an open question again, feel free to type some answers in the chat. How does the lack of diversity affect your student newsroom specifically? Yeah, I'll wait a little bit. I think for me, yeah, being the only Black writer, for example, it means that you're limited to what you can write. Or, for example, we've had issues with Indigenous representation. And so how do we know how to approach communities? How do we know that we're telling the right stories? How do we have access to those stories? So I'm sure that there's similar things in the high school newsroom as well. So I'll just give you a couple more seconds if you have any ideas. Okay, yeah, maybe we can talk about it a bit later. Okay, so moving on. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. So another thing is that racialized journalists are not being retained or promoted in the newsroom. And so that's another thing, for example, with the Ubyssey, where I saw one Black journalist as an editor, but I wonder how, if I would have continued if I didn't see a Black editor in the newsroom with me. It's an issue that we've had on our paper. I know it's an issue that I also had in high school, with certain journalists being promoted and certain journalists getting the big stories, and then feeling like I wasn't able to have access to the same stories. And I know that this is something that's bigger on a national scale as well. And because editors and people in power have a lot of agency in choosing who gets the stories, and also they're the ones who come with the pitches, so what is being covered, stories on marginalized journalists are often sidelined, and this can lead many racialized journalists to feel overlooked. But then you have another issue with tokenization. So representation isn't always enough, and this can lead to tokenism. And the definition for people who don't understand what or know what tokenism is that tokenism is the practice of making only a symbolic effort to be inclusive to members of minority groups, especially by recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of a racial or sexual equality within the workplace. So for example, a couple of years ago when I was the only Black journalist, I get the Black stories, but I don't get the bigger stories. I don't get stories that are on more wide scale, where I can talk to black people as well, because Black people are involved in the big mental health stories. Black people are involved in the housing insecurity stories. So not being sidelined and being forced to do, being almost compelled to do certain stories, really prevents the newsroom from being so as successful as it possibly can be. And so my question for you guys is, what are some steps that you could take to improve who gets promoted and amplified in your newsroom without tokenization? And so I'm going to continue a bit, and then we're going to come back to that question. So racism isn't limited to just what takes place in the newsroom. It's present within the news as well. So this is a video from Tucker Carlson, where he is an American journalist. He hosts a show on Fox News every night, and right now I think it's the most watched cable news program. And yet, with his power, he perpetuates racist ideologies. And so we're just going to watch this clip. Again, let me know if you can't hear it.
This may be a lot of things, this moment we're living through, but it is definitely not about Black lives. And remember that when they come for you, and at this rate they will, Anyone who's ever been subjected to the rage of the mob knows the feeling. It's like being swarmed by hornets. You cannot think clearly. And the temptation is to panic. But you can't panic. You've got to keep your head and tell the truth. Tell the truth. If you show weakness of any kind, they will crush you. Indiscriminate use of violence by mobs is a threat to every American of all colors and backgrounds and political beliefs. Democracy cannot exist when people are rioting. Rioting is a form of tyranny.
Okay, that video is a lot, and around that time, I know there was a lot of similar monologues that Tucker Carlson was putting out. In another clip that I know, he compared Black people to animals, and he used language which is, in my opinion, quite provocative, and it also allows for like hatefulness and racism to persist. And so my question is, so in what ways do the comments that Tucker Carlson made promote disinformation within the news media? I see from Emma that this man makes your blood boil. Okay, yeah, he makes my blood boil too. So you're good there. Yeah, does anybody have any more comments on the video and some of the things that he said? So for example, like, how do his comments promote disinformation? How does it, in what ways does it allow for objectivity to mask some racism, for example? I'm just gonna give you a couple of seconds. Okay, so in my opinion, like, oh yeah, Emma's got another comment. He creates a sense of otherness, us versus them, and falsely threatens that Black Lives Matter supporters will crush people. Yeah, and I think especially being the biggest news show on network news, on network TV, it creates this idea of there are us, we're the people who are good, and we're the people who are being threatened, and there are them, and they are doing this other thing. They are coming for us, they will crush us. And it also reinforces the idea that Black people are aggressive. And so Juliet's got got a comment too. And since it's on mainstream cable, it can seem legit, yeah, whereas it is blatantly racist and dangerous. Yeah, and I think, again, being on a major news network and being at a primetime hour gives it a certain credibility. And when that credibility isn't challenged, it can be incredibly dangerous. Yeah, thank you again for commenting. But this, again, isn't just limited to American outlets. I think it's very easy to say, look at what they're doing over there. But I think even internally, we have a lot of issues that we need to deal with when it comes to racism. So for example, at the beginning of July, many newsletters came under fire for using a mugshot of Mohammed Sow, who was a young Black man who was a victim of gun violence. And in these pieces, originally at least, many of them showed a photo that looked like a mugshot of him when he was the victim instead of the perpetrator. And he died. And I think the photos that we choose are incredibly telling of the ways that we want people to be portrayed. And so people came under fire, like news organizations came under fire, and they all managed to quickly find a photo that was more suitable, a high school graduation photo. And I think this is really, really important when we think about the photos and the imagery that we pair with the headlines that we have. when we compare the image of Muhammad to the images in these tweets, it's really, really interesting to see how different images are also sourced as well. So in comparison, both of these headlines are from news outlets in Manitoba. And in the first, an armed suspect who tried to attempt an attack on Prime Minister Trudeau was labeled as a friendly sausage maker. And if you see here, he's in a sort of military uniform, sort of protecting his country, and he's smiling, and he's seen as friendly, even though he was armed when he tried to attack Justin Trudeau. So even though it says armed suspect arrested, having the words friendly in it also does something when people are just like glancing by the news. And then in this other instance, we have damaging language used. It says Jets parties will turn downtown white again. And it has references to, I guess, Make America Great Again. But this is just supposed to be a piece which is talking about these parties that happen annually, which are called whiteout parties. And it's being portrayed in this way of, we're making the town white again. So I guess my question for you guys is, what is wrong with both of these headlines? And also, how could these headlines and also the images that go along with it be more accurate about the events that they are describing? So yeah, I think I explained it a bit when I talked about the language and the images and the ways that that the impressions that they can leave. And I think another really important thing is the fact that Twitter was used. And obviously you guys know how Twitter operates, but all you see is a photo in a headline or a photo in a couple sentences. And so in that way, people might not stop to read the article, but all they know is that the person is a friendly sausage maker, and doesn't talk about, for example, in the first instance, about who is the perpetrator or like what he's done. Instead, it just talks about him making sausages, which can again be very harmful. So we're going to do a few more examples. Okay. So this is an example from 2016. So it was a bit of a while ago, but it was also my first year of university. So it left a big impression of me on like what was allowed. It's really interesting because I had a friend who was going to Queen's University at the time, and I specifically said to her, like, have you seen what's going on? And she said, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't that big of a problem, actually. Like, they're just kids. It was just for fun. And I think that really made me think about the way that news is made and also the damage that can be done. And so to give a bit more context to this, photos of a party known as Beerfest, which was held at Queen's, gained national attention in November of 2016 when they went viral on social media. And the party was in a neighborhood known as the University District, so it was just outside of Queen's, and it was largely a big home to students and employees of the university. And photos of the party showed young participants wearing costumes based on racial stereotypes, including those of Buddhist monks, Arab sheiks, and Viet Cong soldiers. And they were initially shared by the event organizers on Facebook. So these weren't found, these were in public. And they gained more traction after a comedian posted them on Twitter, along with a series of tweets condemning the event. This is how the images were displayed in its coverage. And I'm just curious to know what you guys think is wrong with the way that this is being covered. Because we see here that it does call it shockingly racist, it does condemn it, it does call it tasteless, in the quotation used by Celestium, the Toronto comedian, but there are some things that are wrong here. So I'm just going to go to the comments again. Yeah, so I've just seen some comments coming in. Yeah, so just to talk about something that Alan said, like you were saying before, there's underlying racist ideas and or prejudices that are masked under the guise of objectivity. And then Juliet said, all of the faces are blurred so they can remain protected for being responsible for their actions. Yeah, that is one of the really, really, really big things. And Alan also hinted at it when he said they're hidden and they're not being held accountable individually. So that's really important. I think I read about it a little bit and they said, well, some of the people could be minors, so we want to protect their anonymity. But it also doesn't allow the people who are in these images who were at the party to accept blame for what they did because they're hidden and nobody will ever know what they did. And it also presumes that they didn't know any better and that they're children. And so they can't understand what racism is, that they need more time to learn, I think. That's what I think. Especially when you compare it to the mugshot that we saw earlier, where they chose the man, like the boy who died, like they chose this particular photo of him, and they showed the photo, almost assuming that he was a criminal, when in this photo of a lot of white people, they're assumed innocence. And Emma has another comment, which says, I'm not sure what the rest of the article says, but stories like these tend to address the manifestation of racism, e.g. costumes, without acknowledging how racism is in these institutions and enables this behavior. Yes, it did do that in the rest of the article. It said that it was distasteful, but it didn't say how, it didn't give any background. It didn't say that this is systemic or the history that this comes from, because Queens obviously was not the first place to ever have a party like this. And I'm sure this is not the only party that they've had in this manner. Instead, they were caught. So I think that's also really, really important to know too. Okay, going back to the presentation. So yeah, that is pretty much all from me. I kind of want to go back to the question that I asked earlier. What are some steps you can take to improve who gets promoted and amplified in your newsroom without tokenization? Before I go into questions. So I think I saw a comment about this before that Nathalie put out. And they said, think about issues that matter to minorities. Maybe talk to friends or people that who you know are minorities and ask them what is happening that isn't being told in the media, and write about it to bring light to these issues. Yeah, I think that's amazing. That's so great. I think, yeah, those are some amazing things you can do. It's also about being educated and being able to write about those stories too. So talking to other people gives you some education, but you might not necessarily get just by your own lived experience. And also, yeah, so being able, even if you aren't part of that community, to be able to write about those stories too will really help with tokenization. I think that's a really, really good comment. Does anybody have anything else they would like to share? Okay, I guess we'll get some questions and answers, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the things that we can do in the newsroom, in all newsrooms in high school media. Yep. Oh, I see another comment from Sequoia. You can form relationships with the groups on campus so that leaders feel comfortable, know they have an avenue to share. Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned last year being president of the Black Student Union is that sometimes you need to get the community on board. And if you don't have those connections, then you won't be able to talk to the community or understand how to approach them. And I think, yeah, definitely forming relationships. So making sure that you're talking to people, and not every time, it shouldn't be a situation where every single time you talk to somebody, it should be for an article. Sometimes you should be able to have these conversations just to learn. Yeah, so I'm just wondering if you guys have any questions for me. Okay, I see one from Helen. How would a newspaper reach out to BIPOC groups and form allyships with them without tokenizing? That is really, really difficult. That is so difficult. That is something that I'm sure every journalist is trying to figure out. It's something that the Ubyssey is trying to figure out. It's a discussion that we're having all of the time. I think it's more about doing some education before you go there, meeting people halfway. So, for example, if I wanted to report on the opioid crisis, I wouldn't just go and then be like, we're reporting on the opioid crisis, now give me everything I need for my story. I think at first I would go and I would do the research that I need to do, read other articles that have been acclaimed, do my research, read reports, and then asking. And so that you're coming from a place of knowledge, so they're not feeling like they have to consistently explain to you. Because I know as a Black person, sometimes when I've been interviewed, people are asking me, so could you please explain racism? And you're thinking, okay, you didn't even come knowing about racism. So yeah, that's kind of one of the things that I've tried to do when I'm reporting on other communities. And I've got this other one from their dad. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name. In general, how can one identify tokenism and separate it from genuine advocacy? I think it's about the intentions. A lot of it, one of the questions I got asked before I got this position was, how do you separate being a journalist from being an activist? And I think for me, I still conflate the two in my mind a lot, because being an activist is also providing other people with the tools to understand journalism and also understand the knowledge that you're trying to impart. So I think being genuine, again, is coming from that place of, I'm not coming here to talk over you. I'm not coming here to take up space for myself. I'm coming here to learn. And I'm coming at this piece with empathy, with understanding that I might need to go away and it might not be able to come out next week. It might not be able to come out tomorrow. It might have to come out in a couple of months. And being able to take that time. And also another thing is not singularizing coverage on communities to specific months or specific days. So one of the big problems with the Ubyssey, for example, was we were doing all of this Black coverage in February, and then March hits and there's no coverage. But Black people are still existing on March 1st. And so it's another thing of just understanding that these communities, they still exist even when it's not, even when they're not front of the news, that their perspective still matters. I think that's a big thing that I've come to realize as well. Okay, I see another question from Emma. What should high school teachers and editors keep in mind when educating the staff on how to be anti-racist journalists? Okay, that is a great question. I'm gonna think for a hot second. Yeah, so I guess the thing is to, So one of the things that I've been trying to put forward when people ask me, like, first of all, how to be anti-racist, which is big, because it's not something that you can just master in a day. It's not like you can take one workshop and all of a sudden you're anti-racist. I've been reading some of Ibrahim Kendi's work, for example, on how to be an anti-racist, and I listened to a discussion between him and Brene Brown, where he was basically saying that being an anti-racist is something that is a lifelong thing. It's not something that can be just done over a day or done, because even like we all are capable of putting out racism into the world. This is something that we have to consistently work towards and consistently do. And so for me, it's about checking my language and making sure that I'm not saying things that are ableist or trying not to assume things. It's trying to come from a place of knowledge and also coming from a place of I am able to make mistakes. And when I do make a mistake and when it's pointed out, I'm not coming from a place of guilt, and instead I'm coming from a place of learning. So I guess it's coming, I guess to answer your question more specifically, what should you keep in mind about educating staff on how to be anti-racist journalists, is saying that we're all going to come in from the position that we are able to be racist, but we're going to try and combat that. And so in everything that we do, we're going to give it a second thought, like, is this discriminatory? Are the questions that I'm asking loaded? So for example, am I going to go to an Indigenous group and ask them to explain police brutality to me? Or am I going to understand that these questions and these topics are loaded for specific communities? I hope that answered your question. It was a very long-winded answer. Okay, yeah, okay, awesome. Are there any more questions? Okay, no?
Danni,
Okay,
I have a question
so,
for you.
I'm gonna provide my email. Oh.
Do you mind if I jump in and ask one more?
Unfortunately, Isabel, I can't hear you.
Ah.
I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me now?
1 second, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm also not seeing your message. I'm doing some lip reading now. Oh, okay, I see a question. Okay, from Laura. I'm curious as to how people have been grappling with these questions and issues in their own classrooms and newsrooms recently. So yeah, I guess it's a question for everybody. One second. Okay. I'm just wondering if I can hear you now. Okay, I'm just gonna go to Isabel's question. I'm so sorry, guys, I can't hear any of you, so I'm just gonna keep talking to myself. Isabel also has a question. Do I have any advice for students navigating these conversations online during the pandemic rather than face-to-face? Yeah, that's a big one, because miscommunication, especially in the time of the pandemic, is so huge. It can feel very like isolating, and if you might not be able to read the cues from other people in the same way. And so I guess my biggest advice, again, I know I'm sounding like a bit of a broken record, would be to go and do some research before. And then also, like, when you're talking to these communities, say like, I'm still learning. This is something that I'm still trying to figure out, and I'm just trying to find the best way to report on this. So then you ask your question, or, okay, I've been reading into this, and this is something that I've surmised. Am I right in thinking X, Y, Z? And so like coming from a place where I'm saying, this is the work that I've done. I'm trying to meet you halfway. And then I guess continuing on from there. And I guess Sarah also has a question and says, to Laura's question, raising the questions with our students, I'm an advisor, asking our readers to share feedback, reading anti-racist titles to learn more about how to approach a conversation and be part of the solution, etc. It's a deep, ongoing process, so that every step, however slow or complicated, is essential. Yes, that's all I have to say to that. Yes, I think that's the perfect way to address it, and it's something that I'm also trying to figure out as well. Yeah. Do we have any other questions or any other comments? Okay. Oh yeah, Juliet also has a response to Laura's question as well. My school newsroom has reached out to an association at our school called Blackness. We were told they wanted their own paper, but our school wouldn't give them funding because we have a paper already. So we reached out to them to give our platform to use. That's really amazing that you guys did that. I think one of the things that I've realized a bit over this process is that when institutions, sometimes when they're pushed up against the wall, they want to change things, but when it comes to permanent change, they're a bit scared to do so. So creating space is an amazing way to make sure the different stories are platformed. I think, for example, last month I did, 2 months ago, I did a piece on for National Indigenous Month. And I basically said, like, I'm going to create this space for you. I have these 2 pages. These aren't for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the work. I'm going to interview you. I'm going to write down your interviews exactly as you said it. I want to attach a picture with it, but I want you to have agency over every single step. So I'm taking photos, a bunch of photos. I'm going to send them to you. You can pick them. And then also going back is to say, like, here is what I'm going to put out. Are you okay with this? And so giving out my space at the Ubyssey, which is inherently an institution which has not been able to do this, or because of the rules of journalism would normally frown upon this. I'm saying, like, how can I make sure that this story is told as accurately as possible? And so that's, again, another way to, like, use the space that we've been given to create different room for different voices other than our own. Okay, I've got a question from Sequoia here. Should a newspaper have a political mandate? That's a great question already. I think it's clear that publications should have an anti-oppressive mandate, nothing racist, sexist, ableist, etc. But should a newspaper go further and take stances like decolonial or pro-Palestine as well? You shouldn't apologize. Do not apologize. The question makes perfect sense. So that is a big question. And I think, for example, with the New York Times, I don't know if you guys know about the op-ed that came in from Tom Cotton, which was called "Send in the Troops." And a bunch of Black journalists at the New York Times were saying, this article, this piece is threatening to us as individuals, as people who work for you, and we take a stand against this. And that was so powerful because the person who was in charge of putting out opinion pieces basically had to leave his job, resigned. There was a lot of structural change. There was a big group meeting about it, where the New York Times, for example, came from this position of we have all this Black Lives Matter coverage and all of it is this particular stance, so we need something on the other side. And sometimes I think you don't always need something on the other side. I think when it comes to a person and their right to exist, I think that's when we need to be making a stance. However, that's not going to be how every newspaper feels. So I'm not sure if I can say a newspaper should. I believe it should, but objectively, will that change? I think that's something we have to see with time, and it also changes with the journalists you have in the newsroom. Exactly. So Emma said when they mistake neutrality for objectivity, not all opinions deserve a platform. Yeah, and I think that's something that they came and said, we realized we made a mistake. Not all the opinions that we have, not all the opinions, especially when it's dangerous and it's talking about enacting violence on Black people, that is not something we need to platform. And I think they tried to excuse it by saying it was coming from an official, somebody important. But again, you've seen this with Twitter, where they're removing misinformation from Trump's tweets, where they're saying, okay, we believe this is important, but we aren't going to allow misinformation from elected officials, from important people, to be seen as objectively true. And I think that's another way that people are taking a stand in this era and in this moment. Okay, so I know we're reaching 3, and that's roughly the time that we said we'd end. I'm happy to answer some more questions, but if you need to leave, feel free to. And I know that I'll be sending out the slides and also my email and other ways to contact me. So feel free to reach out with more questions if you need to go right now. But I'm happy to sit and take a few more questions if you want. Of course. So just checking if there's any more questions. Of course, guys. Thank you. Thank you for coming and listening.
Yeah, Danni, we're so happy that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks you guys for coming up too.
We'll be
Yeah, I
sending.
can't hear any of
do
you
want
guys,
to
so awesome. All right, thanks guys.
Oh, wait a second. Hey, can you hear me there?
Now you're good.
Okay. To everyone who came, thank you so much. If you could message me, we're going to be sending out a feedback form. If you can message me your email, you can do that privately so that we can send it to you directly. We'd appreciate it. Thank you so much to Danny, and thank you to everyone who came. We're going to be doing a full schedule of Zoom sessions throughout the fall, 2 a month. One of them is going to be tutorials and workshops on specific skills, like news writing, interviewing techniques, anti-bias training. And we're also going to be doing monthly more social meetups where you can meet and speak with other high school journalists and advisors and share your work and hopefully form more of a community. So keep your eye out on our emails, visit our website, and sign up for our mailing list if you're not on it already. And yeah, we want to hear your input. So what do you want to see and what would you find helpful? Send us an email, let us know. And we hope to see all of you at future events. So again, thank you, Danny, and thank you to everyone who came and shared your excellent comments and questions. All right, I think we'll sign off there. Okay.
Funny. Yeah, thanks guys.
All right, thank you all. And yeah, anyone who wants to stick around and chat, you're more than welcome.
We're good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I couldn't hear from the moment I couldn't even hear the videos or anything. Like the moment the first clip started playing, I just couldn't hear a single thing. So I was like, I don't know if anyone's talking. I'm just gonna keep talking. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I think it got confused, like because I was playing a video out loud, so then it didn't know like what to connect to. I don't know. I'm really sorry about that. It's crazy.
It's not your fault at all. It's
No.
probably on my end because when we did the setup for the Zoom, it was on a separate Zoom meeting. So
yeah,
I guess the settings just weren't configured right for this meeting. So it's not your fault. My
but people
fault.
could hear the videos, right?
Oh yeah, it was clear
Okay,
as
so
day.
I was the only one who couldn't hear it. Okay, perfect. I was like,
you did a really fantastic. That was fantastic. Thank you, Danny.
That was so great.
It was really. I'm already getting people saying that they loved it. So
okay, well, I'm glad they loved it, even though like I was like, I don't know if people are talking, because at first I was like, oh, am I allowing people to speak? But I couldn't physically hear anything, and I didn't realize that I couldn't hear anything until I saw you try to speak, and then I was like, oh, okay, like I physically, like I'm not hearing anything.
Don't worry. This has happened to everyone. Like I think this is just going to be a fact of life that we all have tech issues. And,
yeah.
But I think it was like all of the important stuff everyone was able to take away. So regardless.
Yeah.
Okay. As long as people could like hear it. And
if people really want to hear the Desmond quote, like we'll send the slides as well. So it's
perfect.
People will still be able to hear everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I knew it was the headphones, I would have just disconnected. You were so right. I didn't even realize.
I wish I had realized that earlier. As soon I was like, oh, that. Anyway.
Oh, that's what was. Oh, okay.
It was my headphones. Because I think before I was trying it without my headphones, but then I connected my headphones and didn't realize that maybe it doesn't work with that, which makes sense.
I guess.
Yeah.
Weird. Don't worry about it. It barely, like, it was like a blip for 2 seconds. It didn't affect anything. Yeah. I was freaking out because at the beginning I lost internet connection as I thought. So I got disconnected. So I thought that you guys were also disconnected, and like, I'm glad there were no disruptions at that end. So, but no, Danny, that was wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for doing that.
Do you feel good about all like your?
Yeah. I wish I could have had like more of a discussion at the end, but like, you know what? I managed to like answer some questions. And
you had really valuable answers as well. Like I think there was a lot to take away from that.
Okay, that's good. Okay, yeah.
I know it's really tricky with it's also I hope you don't leave thinking that no one spoke because of anything about that session. We've had like no one speaks and no one types anything in chat, and that's just how it is that day, and we have no idea why.
I'm glad that
so I think it was actually.
People seem quite engaged.
Yeah, I'm glad that people could chat. I was surprised. I was like, I can't hear any of you, so I don't know if you can hear me. There were like certain times where I was like, I'm just gonna keep speaking, hopefully. And I was like sharing and unsharing because I couldn't see any of the comments. That was another thing. I was like, because at first, so I was the only person who could hear the video and you guys couldn't. And then I was like seeing like messages, and then during the other video, I got your text a few minutes late. So I was like, wait, no one can hear it because I can't hear it. So anyway, I'm glad that like, I hope people took something away, and yeah, I'll be really happy to answer more questions if people email me, or if they even want to like, follow me on Twitter and DM me if that's easier. I don't know.
I think potentially just by nature of the topic, some students might just want to reach out to you where it's not like 30 people watching their question or answer. So I'm sure you may get some of those as well.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you for doing this.
Yes. Of course. Anytime.
Would you ever, like, I was saying to Isabel before, like, this is the kind of session that I could see, doing again in the future, and being really valuable, especially when school started up again and more people are engaged. Like, I think I was happy with the turnout. Me too.
I was really happy with the turnout. I thought it was a good number. I'd be really happy to do it again come September, and I think I would love to do it with Bailey, because Bailey's also got a lens on disability reporting, and she does like the most amazing disability reporting, and I think that would be really, really useful as well. And she's wonderful, and I know she knows you guys, and she thinks you guys are great. So yeah, I would love to do something with her as well.
That's really a cool idea. That would be a really interesting mix. Yeah.
Danny, one other thing I thought we could run by you as well. Laura mentioned at the end that as we're thinking about fall planning, we talked about the possibility of having like one session a month would be a tutorial, and as Laura said, the other would be more of a conversation about student work and students kind of talking among themselves. And we thought like potentially that could be led by a university type role. Do you think that would be effective, or something you'd be potentially interested in if we?
Again, I'd be interested to help whenever, so just let me know. And I know that at Nash, I didn't do it, but I know there were lots of journalists who were like looking through students' work, and like they'd like come with a whole bunch of feedback, and I think that could be really, really helpful. The questions, like everyone is so smart. I was not that smart when I was in high school. Like I can't. And like so knowledgeable in ways that like I just was not able to be, and I'm so glad that like you guys are so smart.
There were also some, definitely, I see in the chat there were a couple of teachers who were asking questions as well, so they were I think I found it very helpful. For future sessions, would you find it like, would it be less stressful for you if one of us was going through the comments and just kind of like condensing and then telling you?
I was gonna ask you guys to do that, but then I was like, I can't handle another, like, I was like, it's cool, I'm just gonna stop sharing, go and see what's there. Because I know I was like, because I was actually like reading the question for the first time out loud. So I think that could be really helpful. I think, all the questions in the comments would be ideal, because I know even from my, like, even in my classes where like when we moved to Zoom, everyone was speaking. The moment we went online, like no one wanted to speak. And so it might be just a situation of like using the comments as a speaking feature and then like condensing those comments, which is kind of why I left like the big question till afterwards, because I realized that like people still needed some time to think.
I'm so glad you did that, by the way. That was a very good move.
Very good,
So no, I think like, thank you guys for having me. Really frustrated, but like not mad. Like these things happen. At least I could get through it. I was concerned that I wouldn't be able to get through it, especially after the first video. But I'm glad that everyone got to hear the other clips, because they are, in my opinion, slightly more important.
I honestly think it wouldn't. It was clear we had like a little audio mishap at the beginning. Other than that, I don't think it would be obvious to anyone that you couldn't hear us.
Okay, seriously. Good. And a lot of people were just keeping their microphones on. I don't think a lot of other people were actually trying to speak. I think people felt a lot more comfortable typing in the chat. So I don't think you missed out on too much.
Okay, amazing, great. Yeah.
So Danny, I'm gonna send out like the feedback form. Are there any questions that you want me to put on it, like in particular, that you'd find helpful?
Yeah, like, are there more things that you'd like to learn about anti-Black racism? And I also wish I had a tiny bit more time to talk about like high school and like how that could apply. That's like one of the things I wish I got to do more. And it wasn't until then that I realized that I couldn't hear anyone. Because I could have like left and come back or something. But yeah, I think that's like a big thing. Like I think like making it applicable to everyone and like how can you change that within your newsroom in high school. So
okay.
Laura, I'm just curious, do you have the results from the poll right now? Would you be curious to see where people were from? I'm just
Good idea. I'm gonna pull that up. How can I stop this?
I think if you share your screen, or you can just read it out.
Now I had to switch because my computer crapped out. Let me, I just can't get the poll. It's still in progress. Okay, one sec. But yeah, Danny, could you see that framed as like a question on a feedback form? About
almost as if like did you find ways to apply the stuff in the presentation to your own newsroom? And can you think of, or like almost like, are there ways in which you can incorporate what you learned into your work or your projects?
That's a good idea. Okay. Did you find ways? Just
in case, like, because if I do this again, I think I'm definitely gonna. I liked the examples less. Like there was a bit in the middle that I was like, this we could have used without this, but I can't remember what it was. It was right before. I think it was the like the bigger things. I think I would like to, if I did it again, I would like to change it to things you could do in your newsroom and then have a discussion about that rather than like the big like mainstream things. And then like, if that makes sense, just do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay. Cool. That is perfect. All right. I can actually, would it be okay if I just run by the feedback form with you quickly before I send it out?
Of course.
Okay, awesome. And I can send the poll results too. I'm trying to bring them up now in this very inconsistent setting. Yeah, we got one comment in the middle there. There was somebody saying it was after your first point about being your authentic self, and they also commented like their high school principal has to read all of their magazines before they go. Oh my gosh. So
me too.
So gross.
I wrote a piece on self-esteem and self-harm, and when I was in high school, they didn't really tell, like for the most part, everything I put out would just come out, and sometimes we would like add a paragraph or something. But what they did was they just removed all the self-harm stuff and just left the self-esteem stuff, and then had like this person, and it was like body confidence, be confident, and like they just didn't even tell me. And I opened it and I'm like, I wrote this, and it had my name on it.
That's, I mean, then that's not even your work. I mean,
yeah, I was like, I guess
it's worse than even reading your content. It's horrible, like misrepresentation.
Yeah, I think they would just, somebody said something along the lines of, well, I can't put that out there, otherwise it would give people ideas. I was like, okay, well, you could have told me that, or I could have like reframed it in a different way. But it was basically like, reach out for help. Like, these are some numbers you can call. They just removed the whole thing.
That could only be positive.
Yeah.
Give people ideas about, good things to do.
I know we had incidents at my school where there would be like, the one that always comes to my mind is we had like a anti-Semitic graffiti incident, and we weren't allowed to write about it because it would portray the school in a negative light. Like, no words.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, yeah, that's a negative light. No one's denying that. All the more reason. Anyway, it's one of like, that's the recurring problem we see at so many of these schools. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah, they shared the poll results. So can you see them?
I can see them. Yeah.
Okay.
Surprised, like people from the States too. That's cool.
Yeah. Good number from the States.
Sorry,
And
Laura,
one
no
from Quebec.
territories.
Yeah. A lot of people in grade 12, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And interesting that a couple of people who aren't involved with any media at all and just interested. Cool.
You learned something. Okay, yeah. That's cool. That's cool. I don't know who was involved with university media, but it's me. Maybe one other person.
I think we had 2 people sign up from McGill as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if they came. But.
Well, at least one person would have had to come because 5% is 1. So and 1 is
True. Someone came from Quebec.
Yeah. Okay, sick.
Cool.
Well, thank you again, Danny. This was, and I know like this could not have been an easy presentation to put together. That's a huge topic to take on. Thank you so much.
Of course, yeah. Let me know any other time I can help you guys, or be of help. Like you guys have got my email.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love doing this sort of stuff, so just let me know.
Awesome.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Danny. Okay, we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Right. Bye.